Hey guys, with all the recent coverage we've decided it's finally time to make some kind of guide to development, explaining all the core concepts of Aces and Armour, sort of as a handbook that can be referred to, whilst also clarifying any questions people may have had. We're also happy to announce that we've put together a roadmap, which you'll be able to find on the Discord server or the Aces and Armour website, and that's something that a lot of people have been requesting. So, Aces and Armour is a World War II military simulator designed to place the player as an individual crew member in military vehicles. In a similar vein to IL-2 or DCS with high fidelity vehicles, each designed to be a gameplay experience in itself. We've set our sights on first and foremost becoming a tank sim with distant stretch goals of implementing aircraft if that becomes feasible. We divide development into modules. Eagle-eyed viewers may have already realized that this is how every update has been presented so far as well. A specific feature is developed with the intention of integrating into the whole. We apply the same logic to the overall development. The design space is left open for a specific feature at a later date, but we are first and foremost focused on what is directly in front of us. The rationale being that a solid foundation will serve us far better in the long term. And what this means for Aces and Armour is that we are entirely focused on ground vehicles at this time, and this will remain the case until that overarching module is fully fleshed out. Multicrew and historical accuracy is a main focus, with players crewing vehicles with friends or commanding an AI crew if you want to play solo. We're committed to making sure that vehicle operation has some depth, but also does not require days of study to operate. We want to achieve this without simplifying operation of vehicles, but instead providing a means for players to learn on the fly. This is one of the biggest reasons why we'll stay in the Second World War, as vehicles are comparatively simple and intuitive. In the last demo that went out, a basic version of this is already visible. Everything that we've managed to get to, keep in mind, work in progress, in the tank is labeled with a full write-up on what it does, and even some personal commentary to keep it less dry. We have plans to expand on this system with a diegetic manual where pressing a button will bring up a quick instruction on how to operate a system, with internal links for quick navigation to linked systems so a player can rapidly get an idea on how something connects to the rest of the tank. This system will be somewhat reminiscent of the lookup feature found in many modern CRPGs, where keywords will be highlighted and can take you to other pages or give a quick reference. If all goes well, we'd even like to have these illustrated in the way old tank manuals in the period were, with small cartoons to inject a little life into the affair.
In the interest of catering to players which prefer a simpler, shorter game mode, as well as players who prefer a long simulator gaming experience, we've elected to include two game modes. The first of which is Arcade. Arcade is a simplified, short game mode which puts an entire tank in the control of a single person in a third-person view. This mode amounts to a basic tank-on-tank battle in a control point game mode, in matches lasting between 15 to 25 minutes. This will be familiar to anyone who has played War Thunder. This is an olive branch to parts of the community that want to enjoy our tank combat without the more complex simulator elements of our second game mode, Realistic. The aforementioned Realistic game mode is the bread and butter and the main focus of Aces and Armour. This is the full-scale battlefield pitting two army groups against each other in a realistic engagement, utilizing the full suite of features Aces and Armour has on offer. Our design goals are a large-scale tactical battlefield with AI infantry and vehicle scouting, fighting at the front lines, logistics vehicles keeping them supplied, and the attempted simulation of a World War II battlefield as faithfully as we can with the technology available. Let's take a dive into what exactly is meant with each of those goals. Large scale. What we mean by this is a map that, by all intents and purposes, is relatively large compared to what you find in the rest of the milsim space. We're talking about 14 by 14 kilometers. That allows an acceptable transit time, as well as space for tactical movements and a combination of longer range and shorter range fighting. One of the biggest design considerations of milsims is the amount of time spent outside of combat, as this time is spent preparing yourself and building tension for when all hell breaks loose. Engagement ranges are an important consideration. Most engagements in this era happened at ranges of 800 meters, but sometimes would go up to as much as 2 kilometers. One record-breaking shot made it as far as 4. We expect that particularly skilled players will reach the 2 kilometer bracket. We've also decided that a 5-minute travel time to the combat zone from a forward repair depot is reasonable, which at an average speed of 20 km per hour would be just under 2 kilometers. Moving on to our second set of buzzwords, what do we actually mean by this? By a tactical battlefield, we mean a battlefield that includes various elements to simulate a real-world tactical situation. These include player-ferried supplies, objectives or points of interest on the map, an AI general that coordinates attacks, retreats, and generates directives, as well as the presence of secondary elements like aerial recon and artillery. Let's break these down one by one and examine them in more detail. Starting with the AI general. The core idea is that whilst you are playing a tank simulator, the AI general is playing an RTS, one where he doesn't have the luxury of full knowledge, and where his units have their own free will. The AI general represents the hub where known information via recon and combat is sent, and in return he outputs decisions. These decisions may be to hold ground, to organize an attack at certain locations, to fall back, to prioritize a certain objective. The list goes on. His goal is simply to win, and you are the cogs in his war machine. He is not an oppressive micromanager giving you specific orders. Rather, he operates on a larger scale. It is ultimately up to the player to decide how to go about fulfilling the orders provided, but you're rewarded for following directives. A team that works together is more effective than one that doesn't, and the general is the tool that allows teams to coordinate. We've prepared a little narrative example to demonstrate what exactly we want out of this system. A company of infantry has gathered outside of a town, and a reconnaissance vehicle has reported that the town is garrisoned by an opposing company of infantry. The general then issues orders to the nearest medium tank group to support the friendly infantry on their advance into the town, shelling the defenders during the attack. The nearby German tanks receive an objective on their map and a radio transmission with this order, and move in to assist. The general's orders are to launch the full-scale attack at 15:30, so all assets must be in position before then. During the assault, the recon elements the general previously used to scout the town spot an incoming group of Soviet heavy tanks. The general immediately informs the tanks capturing the town to retreat. The team is low on resources and they can't afford to lose more heavy vehicles.
This demonstrates how we want the AI general to work. An assistant letting you know how to effectively cooperate with the rest of your forces to maximize your survivability and effect. To continue with the same narrative, let's say the Germans have captured the town but are under extreme pressure. Falling back to resupply would mean giving up the town. At this point, the AI general may produce a quota of required supplies that the units need in order to keep fighting. This directive is handed off to logistics, and a couple of players that have just returned back to a rear supply depot receive emergency orders to get supplies to the town. The Opel Blitzers are loaded up with ammunition and they race off to the front line. To stretch the narrative further, the Soviet AI general presumes they're running low on supplies and issues an order for some fast-moving armored cars to try and cover the roads leading into the town in an attempt to cut off the supply routes. The Opel Blitzers run into the Soviet armored cars and are cut down by machine gun fire. This is an example of how the AI generals can produce meaningful and tactical gameplay whilst also forging engaging narratives. As we've delved a little into how logistics work in the latter end of that example, let's talk about that. Logistics are the means by which crucial supplies are carried to the frontline troops. It's best to illustrate the chain of logistics to begin with. Supplies are brought in off-map to rail yards, docks, and air bases, which may not all be present on the map. The supply system follows a logistics chain, where longer links in the chain trickle down resources to smaller links in the chain, e.g., resources trickle down from a rail yard to a supply depot, and in turn trickle down from a supply depot to a repair depot. This process is automated and requires no player input, so no needing to ferry supplies to bases in the middle of nowhere. However, in the event that a base falls into an enemy unit's zone of control, the automated resource trickle is cut off and physical vehicles will thereafter be needed to deliver supplies. This works all the way up the chain, keeping players closer to the action. As mentioned, players may also be called upon to deliver supplies right into the heart of the action, with encircled or desperately finding units that need to be resupplied or repaired in the field.
This brings us to the other thing we mentioned, objectives or points of interest on the map. These are essentially bases of varying purposes that each team has. To run through the basic list: rail yard, far from the front line where supplies essentially spawn. Vehicles can be spawned here. They are prime targets for the enemy. Cutting them off would spell serious problems for the armies relying on them. Supply dump, a yard full of supplies where rail yard supplies flow into it and supplies for the front line flow out of it, whether by the automated system as mentioned earlier, or physical vehicles going there and picking it up in supply crates. Equipment such as towed artillery can be spawned here. Once deposited at a base, supplies function very similarly as seen in games like Squad, if you need a quick reference, where different munitions cost different amounts. Vehicle depots. Depot where vehicles can be spawned, rearmed and repaired, simple as that. Vehicle depots are part of the supply chain, using resources to deploy and repair vehicles, but they do not provide supply to the network. Forward Operating Base, FOB, a fortified military camp that acts as a communication hub, possibly player-created. Ultralight vehicles can be spawned there. Now let's talk about a very important element that ties all of this together: communication. Effectively, radios are the method by which you keep in touch with players outside of your direct proximity. Talking to a player next to you, no problem, proximity chat. Talking to a player 2 kilometers away, I hope your neighbors will not file a noise complaint. Forget about global text chat, you need a radio. Effectively, World War II radios are made up of a transmitter and a receiver. Set your transmitter to a certain frequency and say something. Now other radios that have their receivers set to that frequency will have heard you. As you can imagine, there are so many ways that this can go wrong. At Aces Armour, whilst we strive for high fidelity, understand fully that we are making a game and certain concessions need to be made. Radio operators have a very important job on their hands. Not only do they need to keep track of the battlefield and inform their crew of important events, but they also need to keep in contact with other vehicle crews in order to coordinate effectively. This includes receiving orders from the AI General or other vehicles, giving orders to other tanks in your squad, and just generally keeping on top of a chaotic situation. To avoid overcomplication of the system, radio operators will be provided with a list of all other active radios on the map and the receiver frequency they currently have, as well as an indicator if they are out of range. Keep in mind that not all vehicles have radios, which carries a lot of implications about how you need to coordinate with your allies. Not having a radio inherently makes you more hands-off, but also means you have a significantly hampered ability to coordinate during rapidly changing situations. This even allows the radio operators to technically tune into radio stations, as you can in our current demo. Let's talk about the non-player forces on the map. This encompasses infantry, artillery, and aircraft, for now and for a long time at least. Coordinating with these elements will be crucial to achieving victory. Don't forget, the tanks are there to support the infantry. You can have all the technology in the world, but at the end of the day, boots on the ground are what wins the war. Artillery sections will be present on the map and they answer to the AI General. You radio for fire support on a location and you may receive it, but keep in mind the General may have other priorities. Before we move on, let's briefly cover how multi-crew gameplay works. First of all, if you want to solo play, you'll be the commander of your tank. You will be able to direct your crew, giving areas to drive to and highlighting targets for the gunner, but don't expect micromanaging. This is a more hands-off experience. Aside from that, all crew members and tanks will be able to speak to each other. This is simply a limitation of game design. The downside of not having a radio will be not being able to speak to other tanks, aside from maybe signal flags, proximity chat, or maybe interpretive dance. As for the driver, you've seen how that works. We've spoken about the radio operator. The gunner is relatively self-explanatory, although he does occasionally have to help the loader and learn how to manipulate optics to engage effectively at range. The loader job is a warehouse manager. No, seriously, Try getting ambushed by an enemy heavy only to realize that you placed all your AP shells on the other side of the tank. At this point you have two options: insert an HE shell and hope nobody notices, or ask your gunner, "Pretty please, take your eye off the scope and pass me an AP shell before the turret becomes part of the Soviet space program." The loader not only has to keep the weapon firing, he seriously needs to organize the location of the ammunition, an underrated job that can make all the difference in a fight. And then finally, the tank commander. 9 times out of 10, he has the best vision of the tank. In most tanks, visibility is extremely limited, and the tank commander sits in the one location that has any serious sort of situational awareness. He needs to translate that information into instructions for his crew. An efficient crew is an extension of the tank commander. An inefficient crew can't get anything done.
Now, to leave game modes behind and talk a little bit more about game mechanics and, in a way, literal mechanics. Let's dive into something we know a lot of people have been holding their breaths for: damage models. The way that the damage model works in Aces Armour is that every part in the tank, down to something as small as a junction box, can be designated as a damageable component. Of course, doing this for every piece in the tank would interfere far too much with gameplay. We've gradually scaled it down into the form that we have currently, which we believe is both manageable, while also being sufficiently deep enough not to be overly simplistic. Major mechanical and electrical parts of the tank, such as engines, radiators, turret drives, guns, are what we call repair points. Each of these systems can be damaged or even destroyed entirely. The way this works gets a little technical. When a shell penetrates the tank, it splits into many different fragments. These fragments are divided up by weight and stepped to certain categories. Fragments below 1 gram are harmless. Above that, they are considered anti-personnel and can kill the crew. And above that, 12 to 13 grams are what are considered anti-material and can damage components. When a component is hit, it takes into account the mass of the impacting fragments to determine how much damage it receives. There are several different types of component: non-critical, which can always be repaired; semi-critical, which can be repaired up to a point, which gradually goes down the more damage is received; and critical, which, when it receives damage, stops working entirely and cannot be repaired without an advanced repair kit. This segues directly into repair kits, which are divided into 2 groups: normal repair kits, which can repair semi-critical components up to their limit, and non-critical parts fully; and advanced repair kits, which can be used to repair critical components as well as semi-critical components past their limit. Non-critical components are smaller things like vision blocks, oil leaks, coolant leaks, while semi-critical are bigger, more robust parts that can take a beating but can't be easily repaired in the field. Something like an engine. Critical components are things like sensitive electronics which normally can't be repaired, things like radios and batteries. Repair kits are a physical thing which you need to store inside your vehicle, and most vehicles will only be able to carry your standard repair kits. This makes modifications like the turret muzzle on the Panzer IV actually useful, as it gives you space to store kits. Advanced repair kits can only be brought to the front line by logistics vehicles, highlighting another key role they played. And of course, all damage can be repaired at vehicle depots.
This covers the core gameplay elements that make up Aces Armour. Now we need to talk about monetization. Okay, we really need to talk about monetization. We understand there's been some pushback on what we've suggested, but we want to take the time to unpack the decisions that led us to the current system and show that they were not made out of malice or greed. Essentially, the current plan is this. The base game costs €15, and with that, you get access to all theaters, current and future, and at release, a planned 14 free vehicles. And of course, that will expand after release. The vehicles that come as standard with the game constitute the most common widespread vehicles in service, so that if a vehicle was common in real life, it'll be common in the game too. Then we move on to premium vehicles. This is a pricing model similar to a game like DCS, where a vehicle is put up for sale and available for whoever wants to buy it. This is for vehicles that are slightly less common, but still saw significant production. For the Germans, think of vehicles like the Panzer IV Ausf E, of which only around 200 were manufactured, and many of which were already destroyed by this point in the war. By contrast, the Panzer IV Ausf F would be free, as they were twice as common, almost 500 being built. The Ausf G would also be free, as over 2,000 of them were built, and even though they were just entering service in late 42, we do want vehicles to stay at their pricing bracket regardless of theatre. We've made numerous exceptions in this department to allow certain iconic tanks to become more available, because we understand players really want to play these vehicles. KV-2 would be a prime example, of which 200 were made, which in terms of the Soviet arsenal is a drop in the bucket. And then we move on to the third tier, limited edition vehicles. This is for vehicles that were extremely rare in real life and that nobody wants to see flooding the battlefield. Think of the Störer E-Mill, SD KFZ 247, Porsche Tiger, not the regular Tiger, which would be free. Vehicles made in tiny numbers that we also want to see very rarely in game. Essentially, the plan is that we only sell a certain number of these vehicles and then allow them to circulate through the player base via a market. To state this out of the gate, we're not necessarily against instituting market regulations to prevent scalping or insane prices. No one wants to enter a match and see 20 one-off prototypes running around. If we want to include these rare vehicles at all, we have to monetize them, and we also don't want players to be unable to spawn a vehicle they paid for. Thus, making the vehicles few in number is the solution we've opted for. For the people saying they want no part in a marketplace or limited edition vehicles, there's a couple of things to explore there. Firstly, vehicles that would be considered for limited edition status are exceedingly rare vehicles that we want it to be a surprise to see. Vehicles that we simply wouldn't include in the game otherwise, due to their historical rarity. So for players that propose the model of simply doing it IL-2 or DCS style, you can effectively treat it as such, enjoy the base and premium vehicles, and completely ignore the marketplace, as if the limited edition system wasn't there. This leads us to the other concern, that these vehicles will be pay to win or somehow better than other vehicles. Firstly, we are completely committed to this not being the case, and as it stands, there's no reason for it to be. The vehicles we're currently looking at for this section is absolutely not stuff like the Tiger 1 or Tiger 2. These are far too common to be limited edition. The vehicles we're looking at are not better than Panzer IVs or T-34s. Most of the time, very rare vehicles are very rare because they're not selected for mass production, usually because they're not as good as the designs that were. And with our ability to account for poor reliability, bad transmissions, expensive production costs, there is no get-out-of-jail-free card for vehicles that have good on-paper specs but terrible real-world performance. So simply put, pay to win, no. Vehicles impossible to buy due to hyperinflation, no. The more ways that a game has to support itself, the more it can do things like lower the buy-in price, which has kick-on effects like increasing the player population, making servers more alive. A big benefit of this is the ability for us to commit to a low buy-in price, 15 euros for a variety of high-fidelity vehicles, and we believe many people would consider that to be a good deal.
With all that said, we understand that there has been a large pushback against this system. We want you to know that we have heard you, and that the last section of this video is essentially us saying our piece, so you understand why we made the decisions we did, and why this may be the best system for all parties involved. But we are not blind to the fact that other systems could work. At a bare minimum, the design goal for these limited vehicles needs to follow a certain design principle. They cannot be owned by everyone in the community. There need to be a small amount in circulation. 2, we need to be able to monetize these vehicles to justify the cost of making them. If we can't make any money from them, we simply can't make them. And 3rd, the system can't be pay to win or include grinds. We ourselves have drawn up a large list of monetization options, some of which stretch the rules here to closer match other models seen in the industry, but please keep in mind there are no perfect solutions. With that said, if you have any alternatives that you believe to be more desirable, our ears are open to community discussion. You can get in touch via the Discord or email us. We'll be paying close attention to these discussions over the upcoming days.
With that, we'd like to end on an announcement. It's become quite clear to us that the sim community has some trust issues, and justifiably so. There are far too many projects that promise the world and then disappear, never to be seen again. Putting it bluntly, people have been burned very badly and repeatedly. Given that environment, we've decided to commit to something a little unusual. We're announcing that in the event that Aces Armour ceases development for whatever reason, all proprietary assets will be made open source. This includes all game assets and source code, as well as any other development assets that can be legally and ethically redistributed. We of course have no intention of this ever coming to pass. We are committed to the project, and if the current situation doesn't change, we are capable of continuing development in perpetuity. And that is of course completely thanks to our community, Patreon in the description. Regardless, this means that should the worst come to pass, ANA will be able to live on in some way, either through someone else picking up the torch or by helping someone else to create a game in the space. We hope that this puts some people at ease. We understand that we can never erase all of the doubts people have about the project. We admit openly that it's ambitious. We're well aware of that, but we believe we're up to the task, and the question is simply time. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. Discord server is in the description and in pinned comment, along with our Patreon, and we'll see you guys later.